celebrating and showcasing extraordinary people who are doing incredible things to make our world a better place. This is Close-Up Television. I'm your host, Jim Masters. Thanks for joining us. On today's episode, we celebrate Bonnie Wirth. Bonnie is a highly regarded empowerment strategist and life coach, ordained metaphysical minister, medium, spiritual empath, and healer. Her work is primarily centered on helping and supporting women to process and overcome trauma. Through work together with Bonnie, you can move past the deep impact and limitation of your wounding and reclaim the connection to who you really are. Doing so increases self-confidence as you begin to understand yourself better. You also trust in the purpose of your life, and you're empowered to keep moving forward. Bonnie specializes in facilitating healing so you can live consciously with truth and joy in a way that makes your heart soar. Her holistic, evidence-based practice and strategic tools, rooted in a whole body-mind approach, addresses mental, physical, and spiritual health. Her compassionate, tried and true methods are always from a spiritual perspective that honors the whole person, reminding us that we are innately, perfectly imperfect. Now, to learn more about Bonnie's incredible work, she joins me today in the Close-Up Television studio for this exclusive interview. Bonnie, welcome to Close-Up Television. It's a pleasure to have you here. We did the radio shows together, which was fantastic. And I said, we got to get together and delve in a little deeper in this incredible work you do in healing. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here.
You know, you're really immersed in the world of healing and working with trauma. And I'd love to know what initially inspired you to really want to make healing a central focus of your work. What is it about healing and helping guide others to healing in their lives that really speaks to your heart and soul?
Well, I certainly never set out into, aspirations as a child to do this work whatsoever. But it was definitely through my own lifetime, my childhood experiences, well into my adolescence and early life, where I was pretty broken within my own spirit. And so I pursued alternative and holistic therapy as a way to help me heal what I refer to as being a broken spirit. I had tried traditional counseling and it was great, but I always felt like when I would be sharing things, it was like the wound was just opened up. We poured a little bit more salt into it, and I was left raw and very vulnerable. So I really didn't feel that it was the best course or approach for me. I had reached a catalytic moment in my life by the time I was 30, and I had at that point been at a place of helplessness, hopelessness, and really just wanting out of my life. And in that moment of realization for my own self, I knew that I was in trouble, so to speak, within my own psyche and within my own life. And so I had actually a moment of prayer that basically where I said, God, take me from this life or make everything I've been through mean something. And so through that and a series of events, the universe is magical in what begins to take place and happen.
Yes.
People and circumstances, events started to show up that really helped me to be able to begin to heal my own brokenness. I now really believe none of us are broken, but at the time, that's really where I was. And it was as a result of the healing I received that I began to recognize the power that was available in not only transforming the deepest or most difficult wounds of our past, but also what led me to feel so inspired and passionate about helping others in the same way.
That's fantastic. So how did you sort of start to facilitate this? How did you start to make this something that's reality for you in terms of the training, the background, the education, and all the resources you started to absorb yourself?
Right. Well, it's interesting because I had, been in a career where I was working a lot. And I used to always believe that my family was my priority, but unfortunately, and I'm sure many people experience that, where just the demands of my job and the expectations and those professional responsibilities really got in the way of what were, I guess, my innate priorities, right? And it was, as I began I actually received what I want to say is guidance from my angels, my guides, even loved ones on the other side that began to really push me or redirect me into helping other people.
When did you start to notice that and realize that that's what that was? Because at first it could be jolting, like, wait a minute, what is, if you've not experienced that before,
Right.
it could be breathtaking and beautiful, but also unnerving a little bit because it's new to you. So when we were able to really deduce that that's what was happening for you?
So for me, this has been a part of my life ever since I was a small child. So I was always open to the unseen world, and I always had that support, those conversations playing out even as a very young child. And so as I began to heal my own wounds, it began to really shift, and I want to say open up that connection to the unseen world, or we could say the non-physical world, in a more powerful way. And so it was a very clear and direct communication is what I've always experienced. And so those were the conversations, whether through meditation or just inspired thought, that I began to get downloads through different processes, through journaling. That was almost an automatic channeling message that began to take place. And so it was the nudges, it was the push from the unseen world that led me to give my notice at my old job. I didn't know what I was going to do at that time. I just followed the guidance. I was told that it was time to let go. I was being called. And as I let go of that career that I had, I really kind of sat and went, I don't know what any of this means. And it was in a couple of months later where I found myself in what would have been my first healing modality workshop, where I was actually taking training, and I had approached it because it was the modality that I was using to heal my own traumas and to heal my own wounds. And so I wanted to become my own healer. At that point, I wanted to learn how to do this so I could continue to do it for myself. I never set out to look at doing it for other people. And it wasn't until I moved into it and I had received my initial trainings that I really felt called to pursue or open up what would be a business in service to others.
Why is it important for one to deal with the trauma, to actually meet the trauma and work through it? Because a lot of times people they'll try a lot of different things. They'll self-medicate.
Yes.
They'll shove it under their rug. They won't deal with it. They won't talk about it. They won't go there. But I've always heard that any kind of trauma, and any of us go through trauma in our lives.
Absolutely.
No, I don't think a single person goes through living without some sort of a traumatic situation that happens either to you individually or people that you care about, that adds into the trauma that you're experiencing, or that they're experiencing, and you're taking that on, trying to help them. It's very important to meet it and work through it, right? Because it just exacerbates, it gets worse,
Absolutely.
right? It builds up, it sort of festers, and then maybe there's another traumatic thing that happens in your life that compounds the thing you're not dealing with, and then it's not good.
Absolutely. I think, first and foremost, I can really relate to what you're saying, because that was certainly where things were for me in my own journey. I had very well, and I did a very good job at suppressing that trauma, pretending it wasn't happening.
People wouldn't know.
People wouldn't know. I looked like I was extremely happy on
Smiling.
the outside,
Hi,
had
I'm
everything
Bonnie. How are
together.
you? Right.
Exactly. But in the meantime, I was really suffering on the inside. And it was, through the suppression, what happens when we look at suppressing or denying the feelings of what transpired, whether, or being able to really feel it. I believe in feeling it to heal it. And so I had denied myself of it. When we look at suppressing it, that suppression gets depressed inside of our bodies.
Yeah.
And as that depression starts to take place, it starts to affect our emotional well-being. And as it continues to be suppressed or ignored or denied, it moves into where our body is just begin holding this, and it can begin to manifest in different illnesses, creating different, a dis-ease within the whole system, whether it's mentally, emotionally, or even physically. And so when we look at being able to even bring words to the things that had happened to us, we start to release what has been suppressed, because now we're expressing it. And the moment we can express it, we begin to be able to heal it as well. But we need to feel it by all means and all ways. And I think that's exactly what we want to avoid. When we've been hurt, when we've been wounded, when we've been traumatized, we don't want to go there again. It was too painful of an experience at that time, where we don't want to even acknowledge that it happened, let alone to have to get sucked into what is the pain or suffering of that. So we do it by means of coping. We do it by means of self-preservation. And looking at just being able to move forward, to almost pretend it away, so that if we don't, that way it maybe didn't happen, it never happened. Right. And so we get very keen at ignoring. I actually said I should have won an Academy. I should have won an Academy Award at how well I could.
You pulled it off.
I pulled it off.
Thought everything was good.
Yeah.
You're also, is it an ordained metaphysical minister?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, I took my training through the University of Sedona, and I did that again for my own self. I had always, of course, had these experiences with the unseen world, and I knew what they were about, but I wanted to learn more. And I understood the metaphysical principles of what was taking place. And so it just drew me to learning more about metaphysics, understanding the whole concept of God, the universe, and I really delved into the studies. And as I did, it started to really open up what I want to say were truths. It was like I knew it was truth for me. I knew that it was real, and it began to make sense of all of the things I had experienced in the non-physical, or we could say even energetically, throughout my whole life. So it really was a foundation of learning that not only awoken even more inside of me, but also helped me to really establish a foundation of truth, and just to know that, oh my gosh, I know this to be true. I understand this to be true, and I can it put words to something that I wasn't able to understand.
That's fascinating. That's fantastic. Wow. You're also an empowerment life coach.
Yes.
Describe that work. What does an empowerment life coach do?
I basically lead people back to who they are. I help them in understanding their own power, their own light, we could say. But more than anything is just to facilitate them through a journey of self-discovery, self-reflection, of course, the deeper healing of what can be some of the wounds and challenges. And we've all got a story, and helping them to really recreate the story for their life. And as they begin to do that, feeling more in tune with their own inner truth, and being able to express and experience life in a whole new and beautiful way.
That's fantastic. That really is. So what would be some examples of the work? Is there maybe like a success story? You don't have to mention any names, but something that comes to mind. You probably have a list of scenarios where that work was applied and it really helped take a person from point A to point B in such a positive way in their life.
Yeah. Well, I am an example of that. I'm an example of what is possible, and what I want to say is a way of being able to really become our own miracles. And not only that, working with people over these years, I've worked with a lot of people who are in crises. They're in mental, emotional crises. Success stories, vary and are. I have many of them. One client in particular had been in such a state where she had seen her doctor and had asked for more prescription for her antidepressants. She was already maxed out on dosage. There wasn't anything more that the doctor could do. Had appointments and actually wanted her to begin to see a psychiatrist for her problems. And she looked at, alternatively, turned to me and said, can you help? She didn't want to go that route. And through a progression of healing, the conversations, and really helping her to become more self-aware within her power of choice, she was able to actually, within probably 8 to 12 months, almost completely quit taking her antidepressant. She was on the most minor or minimal dosage that became possible. And so with that, she began obviously experiencing more joy and well-being in her life as a result. I deal with a lot of people who come to me who are at the point of where they're having suicidal thoughts. They've been in times in their life where they just didn't see any other alternative, and so they turned to me as the alternative, and I'm able to help them to really, again, move past the very helpless or hopeless state that they are in and reclaim their life again. And so it really is interesting how the universe works, because basically I am working with people with the same storylines, the same scenarios that I myself had to heal and move through.
So you
and
identify with it.
Right, I can really relate to it. I can help speak to it based on my own experiences, and then of course basically I always refer to becoming their soul friend as we navigate and move through the healing together.
So unresolved trauma really does sort of steal away the joyfulness in our lives, right?
Yes, it absolutely does. And we're here to experience joy. We're here to know well-being. And those were, we sometimes feel like these are the cards that have been dealt in my life, and we feel stuck. We feel like there's no momentum forward, and we just need to settle for where we are or accept life as we know it. And that's simply not the case.
Now, some people may have heard of talk therapy. Is any of this involved talk therapy, or is this different from talk therapy, and what would the differences be?
Yeah, well, talk therapy is definitely incorporated within the work I do, simply because we need to be able to tell someone about what has happened and being able to give words to the pain, to tell the stories. I know for myself, the stories that I held through experiences I never spoke of. I never told anyone. And so to be able to, as even I move through my own healing journey, to be able to give voice to that was powerful. So that is definitely a part of the process. I also do, energy work or energy medicine as well. And so through many different trainings or modalities, begin to kind of follow what would be in someone's best, or their, in sharing what are some of the energy healing. Obviously, people need to be open and willing to receive what's available. But, through talk therapy becomes very powerful, but we add in the aspect of energy healing into it, and it really begins to be very transformative. The other key within it, I think that what sets maybe the work I do maybe apart or different than other people, is I use my connection to the other side. I use the connection to their guides to receive what would be a very personalized approach or guidance that is specific for the individual, and that really makes a big and powerful difference. I might think I know what someone needs, but when I open up and I receive the guidance on their behalf, it begins to really speak to what their heart needs the most.
I would imagine, too, establishing that trust right at the outset, the trust between you and them and you, sort of facilitates this open door for them to then be able to share probably some things that they don't even share with their closest loved ones and friends.
Absolutely.
Because there's this trust, non-judgmental zone that you're offering to them. You're not judging them, you're here to listen and then guide them and come up with a way to help them through. Tell us about the importance of trust.
Yeah, and trust is a major factor. And I think a big piece of it is also being able to hold a space of what would be compassion for the human condition.
Right.
Compassion for what they've been through without judgment. Because I think that's probably one of our biggest hurdles as human beings, or our ego. We always like to judge and our own self especially. And so being able to have a space where they can just open up to be seen and to be heard is a very powerful thing.
Why did some people choose self-medicating versus really going into alternative healing?
Right, because we're conditioned to. We're conditioned to look for the quick fix, something that's going to help in the moment.
Right.
And it is, and by all means, I know I certainly, was no different. I mean, for me, it was, wine is a very good place to kind of, move into drowning my own sorrow. And so that was
Especially
definitely,
a good Riesling.
Especially a good Riesling, exactly. Oh my gosh. And so, that really becomes, we do what we can to cope. And there are a lot of healthy ways to cope, and there are a lot of unhealthy ways. But we do it to numb out. We do it to settle down, to cut off, right? To lessen what is the pain or the exasperation of that pain when we're triggered.
And then it becomes addiction, right?
Very
Whether
easily.
It's drug or food or gambling or anything, it becomes an
And we're
addiction.
looking for reprieve, and we're looking for, and really ultimately what it comes down to is we're looking to a connection to something more outside of more than just what we're experiencing in our day-to-day life. And that's what a lot of coping or self-medicating does, it allows people to find a connection to something other than the reality that they're living.
You talk about one of the other things that's really essential is living authentically. And you hear a lot of people saying that, but they're not necessarily doing it.
Yes.
Define that for us. Why is it so important to really, I would imagine it's very liberating and it takes a weight off of self-imposed burden that you're not living authentically. So when you live authentically, it's almost you can breathe because you're really being the essence of who you really are.
Yes.
Tell us about that, the authenticity.
There's such liberation in that. You know, there truly is. As you said, you can breathe, you can kind of move through life in a whole different way. I think for starters, we all have a different definition of what authentic means. And I know that I certainly have been criticized or have been, you know, judged in terms of whether or not I'm really living authentically. But we look at authenticity based on what's true and authentic at our very core, not based on someone else's definition as to whether we're being authentic or not. But it's about getting real. It's about being real about how you feel, your perspectives that you hold, whether other people agree with your point of view or not. It's being able just to show up and be who you are without meeting what would be the expectations of other people. And it's not an easy thing to do because, of course, we do certainly want other people's approval. We want nothing more as human beings than to belong.
Acceptance,
right?
And right.
So we're very good at morphing and changing who we are in order to fit in and in order to be accepted. And yet ultimately, when we look at authenticity, it's about fully accepting who we are. It's about becoming, our own best friend, and more importantly, just letting that be expressed, letting, however, the things that are imperfect about us. I think we all try so hard to be perfect. I know perfectionism was a really big challenge for me, and it is letting go of that and just saying, this is the real me. This is, unapologetically. I think it's important that we apologize when we hurt someone, but we certainly don't need to apologize for who we are or our presence in the world.
Perfectly imperfect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That we really are, right?
Absolutely.
I had a conversation with a couple of folks that they were talking about. I asked, they were perfectionist. And, working in an industry like this demands perfection all the time.
Absolutely.
Everything has to be exacting and look a certain way and come off a certain way. But, and one of my friends said, well, I'm a recovering perfectionist. That's what she said. I said, well, I don't know if there is such a thing, but she struggled with everything has to be really perfect. I mean, everything, including the labels of the cans and the cabinets have to face forward and perfection, yes. OCD, perfection, a little bit combination there. And I said, how about this? How about you drop the word perfection, perfectionist, perfectionism. Drop it out. I'll give you a word that still can satisfy that drive that you have, striving for that, but will allow you to breathe deeply and more fully because it's less constricting than perfect. You're striving for excellence. And they're like, oh my God, wow, striving for excellence versus striving for perfect.
Yes.
Similar, but you can breathe more with striving for excellence. It sounds better too.
Yes.
And making a change just like that, and even sometimes how you word things and how you look at things is really essential to your work, right?
Absolutely it is. Being able to change how you are not only looking at yourself, how you're speaking about yourself and the world around you is a real powerful shift in mindset. And it is necessary to do that work. I know for myself, when I first started out, I remember, excuse me, one of the gentlemen that I trained with had said to me, Bonnie, you need to get your thinking right. He says, you don't even recognize your own power, but you need to stop going down what is the negative thought trail and start get yourself thinking right. Now, I'm a huge believer in there's no right or wrong, because I believe at the deepest level we learn and awaken and evolve through what we could say is some of the wrongness.
Yeah.
When it comes to perfectionism, I always say too, drop the perfect and it's just your isms.
Right. Exactly.
It's fully expressing your isms. But we do, first off, I love your approach on excellence because it brings in, there's a part of us in those isms that we have is about our own integrity. So we don't, we want to make sure we are showing up. There's certain conditions conditions that, yeah, there are things within our life that need to be met. There are certain responsibilities that need to be upheld, but we also let ourselves be within the isms of things as well, right? And it just helps that shift in mindset, being able to go from a place of saying, life is terrible, and I'm even saying I'm sad all the time, or I am depressed. The moment we're doing that, we're buying into that energetically. We're basically calling it in, and it's becomes the very experience that we begin to live. And simply being able to change the thought process that says that I am worthy of happiness. Just that in and of itself, you may not be happy, but suddenly it helps to alleviate what is the feeling of depression. Right. Yeah. So a shift in mindset is very, very powerful, and it begins to work, what I want to say, in co-creative action, with inspired action for our own life, and really beginning to make some transformational shift and change. And I know that, gratitude, I'm sure, we hear that all over the place. It's become a very common practice.
Catchword, yeah.
Exactly. But being able to find and be grateful for the things in our life is one powerful way to begin to shift our mindset. We begin to start recognizing the good that does exist in our life, because now we're taking our thinking out of everything that's wrong, or everything that's going wrong, everything that's happened, and especially, when we're looking or dealing with past circumstance.
Everybody deals with trauma differently, and works through trauma differently, don't they?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the thing is, one of the things with trauma, I think it's really common in this day and age. We hear a lot in terms of a measurement of trauma, trauma as to whether it's a big T issue or it's a little T issue. I think that in and of itself really minimizes people's experiences. And now we're measuring the impact that a scenario has had on someone, an experience, and how they've impacted. And we begin to take people into even further wrongness about it. That measurement diminishes someone's emotional feelings. And even though we deal with trauma in different ways, even though two people can be in the same experience or a situation, we all have different reactions to it. But ultimately, how it affects us at the emotional core is exactly the same, whether it was something big or whether it was something little. We're not wired for traumatization. We're not wired for it. We can't cope with it, and it doesn't matter
Fight
whether
or flight,
absolutely. It doesn't matter whether it's something that happened directly to us or even an indirect experience where we maybe witnessed something happening to someone else. It can still have as much detrimental effect on our own psyche.
What about, like you said, something that you went through was basically faking happiness?
Yes.
Social media is a great breeding ground for a lot of that too, because a lot of people put things out on social media that make it look like everything is perfect, happy. They're on the boat this weekend, they're having lobster, everything is perfect, but underneath they're probably in a dark room in their pajamas, with the light bulb out. Faking happiness eventually catches up with you, doesn't it?
It absolutely does, and I think bring social media is a great example of that. And when we talk about authenticity, social media is a great example of that as well. And so being able to express ourselves in a way that really admittedly says, hey, I'm having a great day and having lots of fun, and today not so much. I'm really struggling. Here are some of the things I've been doing to kind of pull me out of it. I think that's where we get real. I love when people are real on social media. They're raw. They're talking about the joys in their life, but they're also talking about their challenges too. And sometimes social media falsifies the challenges.
Today the souffle dropped.
Right?
Not the perfect picture of the perfect souffle. Today my souffle dropped.
Yes.
You incorporate, which I really like, Bonnie, is this total mind, body, and spirit approach. It's not one without the other. They're interconnected, interwoven, and blended. Tell us about that.
Oh my gosh. So what's so beautiful about it, and this is where I think we all start within our journey, is, as I said, getting the mind working for us, right? So we begin to work at really kind of nurturing our thoughtfulness, our being in the present moment, really looking and beginning to think affirmatively for our lives, that begins to take resonance, energetic resonance, and our body begins to regain some vitality as well. But through that, we begin to really look at the fact that this body is a temple, and we need to be caring for this body that we've been given, whether that be through exercise, nutrition, whether that, even hydration is a way of caring for our body. So it does become a very, the work I do is very self-oriented, not from an egotistical, but really taking care of our physical needs as well as the needs of our mind and feeding our mind with things that are healthy. And then there's the spirit side of things, where again, this is about knowing who we are at our spiritual core. We've heard many times that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And so we need to nurture that spirit self. That's in whatever way or means really resonates in terms of what is someone's ultimately, what is more their truth. And spiritual practices can be anything from meditation to prayerfulness, can be, sitting, even taking in circles with people, who are doing healing work, etc. But having a spiritual connection, but basically to the spirit that exists inside of ourselves. I like to take the whole mind, body, spirit approach, and I like turn it on its wheel or on its axis, and I approach everything from the spirit first. Because when we nurture the spirit, it's easy for our thoughts to be positive and to be optimistic. And our body responds in kind to that as well, because now the spirit feeds the mind and the mind feeds the body, and it begins to work in cohesiveness that can really begin to bring about that transformation that we're all seeking, and in what we could say ultimately in finding some state of happiness.
You also say, which I think is really terrific, and the way you put it, you cannot pretend your truth away.
Yes.
I like that. Tell us about that.
Yeah, thanks. So pretending your truth is denying who you are. First off, denying how you feel, denying your point of view. We begin to basically abandon ourselves when we do that. But more importantly is, for all of the healers and the mediums, the empaths of the world, we can't pretend that we're not energetically affected or suffering. We can't pretend we're not suffering. We can't. We can do all these things to cope or minimize that suffering, but ultimately it catches up with us. And again, as you said earlier, it begins to compound, and we reach a time of what I always say, which is personal crises, where again there is we're out of balance in our mind, in our body, and in our spirit.
That's so important. Now, there is something called big T trauma,
yes,
and little t trauma,
yes,
which most people just think trauma.
Right.
Tell us about the difference.
Well, big T trauma is, where, again, I guess is defined as having had something like an event or circumstance in your life that is just the most unthinkable or unspeakable thing that has taken place. Absolutely. The loss of a child, even having, been maybe even sexually or abused or anything like that, become very big catalytic events. So anything that's big and catalytic.
Cancer. Yeah.
Absolutely. Medical diagnoses. Those are referred to as being a big T. A little t is a car accident. You've been in a car accident and it's a little t trauma, right? Maybe
your Wi-Fi goes down.
Yeah, right.
Although for some people, they turn that into a big T, and it doesn't need to be.
It doesn't need to be,
A lot of people take the little
exactly.
T's and they turn them into big T's.
Yes.
You notice that?
Absolutely. Dramatization of it. That's what our ego likes to do, right?
Just those videos you see on YouTube, people getting angry and because the coffee wasn't hot enough or they didn't get enough French fries.
But they're being triggered.
It's becoming a big T.
But it becomes a big T because that event is triggering.
Stat.
Right?
They need you. The French fries, don't worry about it.
Exactly. But this is where I say even those little T traumas, when they happen, can begin to become something bigger, and that's exactly it. But the emotional impact of it, the fear that someone maybe felt when they got the news of a medical diagnosis, the fear of their own, mortality, what this was going to mean, it can be just as impactful for the person who the fear of getting behind the wheel again after being in a car accident.
Yeah.
That trauma, the emotional impact that has is exactly the same. And so as I said earlier, we can't diminish that. And as far as I'm concerned, trauma is trauma, especially when we're dealing with it on an energetic level. What we're taking on and what we're holding and the impact of what those thoughts, those feelings begin to have to have on a person.
You talked a little bit about some of your own experiences as well. Maybe you can share with us what happened that actually led you to the alternative approach to recovery.
It was that suicidal moment. I was at a place where I was again contemplating suicide for what was the fourth time in my life. The very first time that I attempted suicide, I was probably about 6 or 7 years old. And at that time,
6 years old.
Yeah, at that time, because of the what was going on in our home, it was very chaotic, very tumultuous household.
Not
and
loving
it just,
and supportive or comforting.
Absolutely. It just felt like it would be easier had I never been born.
Almost like you were the problem.
Absolutely. And I couldn't fix it. And and ultimately a healer. And at that very innocent age, I couldn't fix or I couldn't help anything. So I really felt like if I wasn't alive or my parents wouldn't be having the problems they were having. I took it on and I was blaming myself for it. So I did. I climbed up into the medicine cabinet. I remember it so clearly, taking a handful of aspirin, and having ingested it, and then going into almost like panic and prayer and saying, no, God, please, no, don't, I don't want to die after. I don't want this. And I had a very good sleep, truly. But I was
Missed the school bus.
Exactly, right. But I did, that was the first time. And here I was again for the fourth time in my life contemplating suicide. But this time I had 3 little babies, and at the core, I didn't want to leave them a legacy of a mother who wasn't strong enough to be able to continue to show up for them.
Did you have a postpartum at all? Or?
I did have postpartum, and that actually came about after the birth of my first child. It was really on the tail end of the death of my dad.
Yeah.
So my son was born 2 months after my dad had been killed. I was grieving, and all of a sudden I'm put into the position of being a new mom, and the joy that comes along with that, and really moved, hormonally, everything. It's a natural thing to take place for women. And I remember one time being in a real emotional state, and my mom just said, Bonnie, you need to stop that right now. You're not going to be one of those women. And so I did. What I had done best was to ignore my feelings and to pretend that it wasn't affecting me, because it was, I wasn't going to allow myself to go there. But I had been depressed for many years. Postpartum depression, I think, carried through.
Made it even worse.
Exactly. It was compounding, really,
Little
to the
T
wounds.
went to big T.
Absolutely, that I had carried earlier. So I had reached up this point of crisis, and that was really what was the pivotal time, is I knew I needed help. But what I did, and this is actually, I would say comical in some way, but I guess I find humor in things after now.
Which is very important.
Absolutely,
humor, you got to be able to
right?
laugh at yourself
Absolutely.
and life, because it gets crazy, so you have to laugh.
So I had gone to my doctor, and I had said to him that I was just, struggling. And he pulled out a sheet of paper, and there were all these questions that he was asking me, and I could tell by the questions he wanted to look at diagnosing me with postpartum depression. And so I gave him all of the answers that I knew would not match the diagnosis. So I actually turned away. Because I didn't, again, what my mom had said earlier, I didn't want to be labeled as one of those women.
You're not going to be one of those.
Right.
Yeah.
But I laugh about it. The humor comes because I had help. I could have got help all those years ago, but I chose to not do it. I chose to not accept it. Yeah. Yeah.
So how's it you've been able to also forgive the people that have hurt you? That's one of the hardest things to do, because I know people say that forgiveness can be very liberating, especially if people have hurt you. You want them to apologize. You want them to say, I shouldn't have, I was wrong, why did I?
Absolutely.
You're a great person, I should never have said that, done that, tried that, or attempted that. But forgiving those who trespass, those who hurt, those who judge, whatever it is important, right? But easier said than done sometimes.
Absolutely. And part of that is my approach on forgiveness, which I'll share in the moment. But when we look at it, we also want the people who hurt us to suffer. we're suffering. So by offering forgiveness, it's our way of basically sticking it to
Hope
them.
you get a flat
right?
tire today, buddy.
Exactly. I hope karma comes and bites you in the butt, you know? Right? We don't want to gift someone our forgiveness, but forgiveness is the gift that we give to ourselves. And my approach on forgiveness, and in working with my clients as well, is to look at the many ways to forgive ourselves. We hear all the time that forgiveness is about us, and it truly is. The very basic principle is not about this spiritual act where we feel pushed or this need to forgive other people, but to forgive ourselves. And through my forgiveness work that I've done, I've forgiven myself for being naive. I gave myself for not speaking up at times when I needed to speak up. I also needed to forgive myself for the times that I did speak up and maybe, or I didn't accept the help from the doctor that very day, right? I had to look at all of these ways. I had to really move through and take a look at the role that I played in my own life. And I had to forgive myself for believing I wasn't worthy of anything more. Everything that I've done in moving through this forgiveness process, or we could say is forgiving other people, have forgiven myself. And what I've discovered is as we forgive our own self, the need to forgive anyone for anything completely disappears.
Isn't that incredible?
It's incredible. And so I also, through working that, can now recognize that all of these people that hurt me, wounded me, traumatized me, were also a part of helping me to discover my own self-worth, to be able to know what I was worthy of in my own life.
You became more resilient.
Absolutely.
Right, understood your self-worth.
Yeah, and honestly very grateful for those experiences because it's what's led me to do the work that I get to do today.
It sort of pushed you to say, no, I'm not going to live this way. No, I'm not going to take it. I have worth. I'm here for a reason.
Yes, and forgiveness, like everything, is energy. So when we can understand that we're willing to receive forgiveness, that energy of forgiveness, because we share what is ultimately at the core of all of us, where we are basically in, we could say, an aspect of oneness, which is a lot of with the greater spiritual teachings, is that to know when we forgive ourselves, we are ultimately forgiving the other person.
Exactly right.
It's energetically connected.
Let's talk about the actual work at hand. What are some of the issues that your clients come to you for, that they deal with? And I know it can run across the board. There's so many different aspects to it all.
Yes.
The last couple of years, we've had the pandemic.
Yes.
There's a whole set of other issues that have, been cooped up in the house and not socializing and all the different other things that can, for some people, have taken these things and have actually made them worse because they haven't had the ability to get the help or to even be around people because they're in the house so much. That and what are some of the other things that they're dealing with?
Well, as I said earlier, so suicide is on the rise. Of course, we know, as you said, these last few years, mental health is in crises.
All age groups, demographics,
absolutely.
genders, everything.
So people that are coming to me, and not only suffering within the conditioning of that, but also in terms of having been abused. So the women who have been betrayed, or even those who have betrayed other people. So it's not just those who have been wounded, but also people who have wounded others.
They're feeling the guilt.
They're feeling the shame of their actions and what they're carrying. I work with a lot of individuals who are in what I want to say, especially as empaths, which are prone to being in relationships with narcissists, where again they're losing a sense of themselves, of their own, as I said, their intricate value, or knowing that they deserve something more or something beyond what they've been living. I work with a lot of people who are at are experiencing what would be a critical time in their life, which means perhaps a loss of a relationship, and a loss of a relationship can be through divorce, but it can also be the loss of their loved one.
Yeah.
Right? The loss of their livelihood, even people who have lost their careers, and people who are looking to make change in their careers as well. Most I would say a vast majority of people are seeking that connection, as I said earlier, to who they are, that deeper spiritual sense, and looking for something more of purpose or meaning in their life. And so those become, a lot of people come forward to me as well. And of course, there's also, what I would say, the mediums, a lot of energy healers that are coming forward so that they can follow through with being able to do the work that they feel called to do in the world, but at the same time, not only an understanding what's happening, why it's happening, all these ways that they've been judged or made to feel wrong, as well as becoming empowered within their connections to those unseen worlds as well.
Let's talk about that part of it being, a medium and how that applies to all of this as well.
Yeah, I think that when we look at everything in the world, there's always, whether it is race, whether it's religion, whether, whatever, we are judged. Even sexual orientation, we are judged, for that. And so we as human beings are really good at judging others.
Mm-hmm.
And when we are spiritually connected to the unseen world, there's a lot of judgment on people, where they can believe that they're crazy, that they're making it up, or they're frauds, or that, that this is the work of dark magic, or, within Christianity, even the work of the devil, etc. Those can be very deminimizing for someone. It diminishes their self-esteem, their self-confidence. They believe that there's something wrong about themselves, and that wrongness perpetuates, and it begins to create, as I said, the impairments mentally, emotionally, physically within their lives, even in their day-to-day life. So when people come, this is about that. When we talk about authenticity, I also speak about what's authentic to the soul, and when we begin to express those innate abilities, I don't believe that God, the universe, whatever word you want to put on it,
Right.
made a mistake that the day any of us were born. There is a very unique and specific recipe for each of us. And so being able to fully accept and understand, who we are in the world as unique and as individuals is a very powerful thing.
We talked about it when we were on the radio show together on Close Up Radio, the power of being an empath.
Yeah.
And I'm fascinated by the empath and the spirituality and the connection between the two.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about your work as a spiritual empath.
Yeah, so there are many different kinds of empaths in the world. There are people who are sensitive to animals, who are sensitive to the environment. They may be sensitive to other people's thoughts. They're other people's, like the energy, so to speak. But as a spiritual empath, we are what I always refer to as being the ultra sensitives of the world, the ultra energy sensitives, which means we are sensitive to everything that I just named, but we're also sensitive to the shifts and changes within the atmosphere, what we say, what takes place with what happens with the earth through different shifts, or even earthquakes. It's like the antenna's always open.
The radar's always on.
What takes out within the cosmic atmosphere, fluctuations and changes, when we say
almost before things happen.
Yes, exactly. We're also very sensitive to the energy of the collective. So when the collective is grieving, we feel very impacted by that grief. With the fear, especially over these last several years, what we've seen or experienced on the world stage, that the energy of that,
we
feel. We not only feel it, we take it on. And as spiritual empath is, the other key within it is we are also the ones who are sensitive energetically to the unseen worlds. So being a spiritual empath is another name or alias, we could say, for being a medium.
How do you do that without taking it all on and allowing it to eat you up?
Yeah, that becomes through practice, for sure. I think we learn how to manage things energetically by managing our own energy, understanding ourselves as these spiritual beings, understanding the fact that everything is energy, and we begin to be able to shift or change our energetic experiences. It lessens what would be our absorption or the intrusion of those other, what we say, maybe judged or set as being negative or heavy energy. So we look at being able to really move into a place where we are so grounded within our own self, that we are connected to who we are, and that we can allow for what is, what's shared within holistic community as being light or love, but really expanding upon that instead of contracting or turtling out of fear. This is about showing up energetically and being so empowered within our own frequency, our own aura, that we're no longer in absorption, but we're in observation instead. And that's really the gift of the empath, is to be able to learn how to manipulate or work the energy of, and again, not manipulate others, but manipulate the energy of oneself so that we're able to move into more of an observation of what's taking place in the world instead of taking it on. We're so much more helpful and more powerful to the collective even, or to our communities and families, where we're in a place where we can respond to situations instead of moving into reaction.
What about people who, you could be watching this right now on close-up television, and they're liking what they're hearing, they're getting it, they're absorbing, but yet they're afraid to put one foot in front of the other to make that step. Mm-hmm. Because I always say one of the greatest things you can do is, one of the greatest investments you can ever make in your life is in yourself.
Absolutely.
So what if they're somebody that is either hesitant or resistant to any of this, to the understanding of it, or to thinking it'll help them, or anything would be foo-foo or any of that? Yeah. I'm sure you come across people once in a while where, even when it could even be couples, where one is, we need this, and the other's like, how do you deal with those folks?
Well, first and foremost, nothing changes until it changes. Right? So sometimes when we look at the approach that we've been taking thus far, has it been working? Right? So this does take an open mind for sure. This is in the willingness to be able to try something different. We have power of choice, and if we're not choosing this as our direction and path, it won't be of any benefit for someone. So it's when someone is ready to take this approach that becomes most beneficial for them. So I really honor people where they are and what would be their resistance. A lot of that has to do in terms of their conditioning or their beliefs, and I don't go out of my way to change anyone's mind. This is something that's very personal for us as individuals, but it is, even the hesitancy of it, I always invite people to come back to saying, well, but what's the possibility of it? Especially if you're someone who's tried everything up until that point, and I know that certainly was it for me. I tried everything and it didn't work.
None of it worked.
None of it was working. So, this becomes an approach sometimes when we feel like there's no other choices that are presenting.
What's the process like when they first connect with you? Like, what's a first session like, or just the first experience? Do you do some sort of an assessment or something in the beginning?
Absolutely. I always like to have a conversation even before I start working with someone to see whether or not my approach is a good fit for them, and kind of, giving them an opportunity to express what their needs are. And as we move into that, as we come into the first session, we're already in a place of having established a relationship. So we got over the awkward stage through our initial consult, right? And so we're able to begin to move or delve into a direction in most benefit. But this, I always find by the time they come for their first session, it's already the second, and they're much more open and vulnerable with what it is that they like to share. And of course, I always hold that within prayer and intention for them as well.
Why do you love doing this work so much? You're so good at it, and you care about it so much, and you've helped so many. Because the other thing too is, you can help, but they have to take responsibility too, right? It's very important that they take responsibility, because you can't be with them 24/7.
Right.
So they have to call upon some of the methodologies, the tools, the resources, the vision that you've given them, and apply it and sort of go into the resources and the reserves when Bonnie's not in the room or on the phone or on Zoom or whatever with them, right?
Yes, absolutely. Self-responsibility, that's the key, I think, with all of it. It becomes being able to do the work. No one can do the work for us.
Right.
We can all hold space for each other, and I can help someone when they're willing to help and they're doing that work on their own, because that's a part of the journey itself. That's a part of the process. If we're not applying what we're hearing or applying where our invitations are being offered, nothing's going to change. Right. And so in the willingness, the open mind, the willingness to move forward with doing it and take action. It's like, I always use the analogy of someone who is unhappy in their job, and they talk about how unhappy they are in their job and how they wish they had another job, and they go on and on and on and complain, and they're caught up in that perpetual cycle of this terrible job that they have. But in the meantime, they're not looking or sending out the resume for any other job. Right? So without action, nothing happens. So I support people in taking action, and I give them those actionable tools, but ultimately they need to apply and do the work
Which you've done
Yes.
yourself, which is why you can connect with and relate to your clients.
And why do I love doing it? I love doing it because of what takes place for people, where they begin to find joy again in their life, the well-being of, with it emotionally, mentally, even physically. I love watching the transformation and knowing, I'm not the one responsible for
You're
this.
the conduit,
I'm the
facilitator.
conduit. I'm the facilitator. And to see that transformational change and have them step into their life in a way that they're experiencing, they're thriving for the first time, maybe even in their life, is what it's all about for me.
What would you say to somebody watching right now who is going through something quite traumatic, whether it's the big T or little t or little of both? They're watching this right now and they think everything is dark, bleak. Maybe they're considering exiting, whatever it may be, but they're here now watching. What would you say to somebody like that? Because you've been in that place.
Absolutely. I think ultimately they're worthy. They're worthy of happiness. They're worthy of being loved. They're worthy of being respected. They're worthy of more in their life. And that, who they are does make a difference in the life, in everyone's life, whether they recognize that or not. And most importantly, I just keeps coming back to them just knowing that there's something more available for them. It's possible. If it was possible for me, it's possible for them too.
This work really moves you deeply.
Oh, absolutely.
This is in your DNA. This is your calling. This is work you were meant to do. Not just want to do, but really meant to do, right?
Absolutely. And I feel that, and that's what is, being able to hold space and to help someone, give them the tools and to share in the guidance and direction throughout our time together. It brings me joy. And that joy, that, it's not at the cost of other people's sorrows, but what it is, it's because we're able to move through and they begin to find their own joy too. And that's what lights me up.
It's beautiful work. Really appreciate you coming to the studio and really expanding more on the incredible work that you do, Bonnie, because again, we touched upon it on the radio show, but I got a sense early on that you were doing this because it really speaks to your heart and soul as you connect with the hearts and souls of everybody else in a beautiful way, because it is full circle. Life is full circle. We all need each other. We all depend on one another. And we need to depend on ourselves as well. So it's kudos to you for doing the work.
Thank you.
And helping so many people in the way that you do. This was a pleasure having you on the show.
It was such a thrill to be here, and I know for myself, just knowing that through our conversation that it maybe gives someone hope is one of the greatest parts of this, and I appreciate your openness and in our conversation as well, and this opportunity. It's been wonderful.
We will see you again for sure.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
Continued success, Bonnie.
Thank you.
You're welcome. For Close-Up Television and Radio, I'm Jim Masters. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.